Shri Advai Guru Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So we shall continue from first canto, 9th chapter. The chapter is entitled as Passing Away of Bhishma Dev. Text 11 onwards we'll be discussing, right? Panduputran prasharya prema sangatan abhyachashta nuragashray andhibhutena chakshusha. Translation. The sons of Maharaj Pandu were sitting silently nearby, overtaken with affection for their dying grandfather. Seeing this, Bhishma Dev congratulated them with feeling. There were tears of ecstasy in his eyes, for he was overwhelmed by love and affection. So, Bhishma Dev is lying on the bed of arrows when the Pandavas actually come near him, surrounded by all the associates and also surrounded by the family members, which also included Lord Krishna. So Bhishma Dev, when he saw sons of Pandu, all the Pandavas, who had actually come in a very opulent, Krishna especially made arrangement that Maharaj Yudhishthira and all the Pandavas, they should be dressed very opulently before going in front of Bhishma Dev. Although Bhishma Dev was about to be passing away from this world and was lying in a very distressful situation, physically distressful situation, not really distressful, but physically, he was wounded so badly. And they were all going to see him, and Krishna told Yudhishthira Maharaj and Pandavas to dress very nicely and opulently, because he knew that Bhishma Dev would be extremely pleased seeing Pandavas situated well. So it is natural, in the family relationships, that father or grandfather, they feel very affectionate for their children. I remember my brother was telling me, when my eldest brother, he was telling me that when he started working, because our family migrated from Pakistan after the partition of India and Pakistan. So when they migrated, and my eldest brother, he started working, he took up a job, so my grandfather was not very happy. So he was telling, my grandfather was telling him that, if we were in Pakistan, we had so much wealth that, few hundred people would be working under you. But because of this partition, we have to leave everything. My grandfather was a very big landlord. He had more than 300 workers working for him. But they left all of them after the partition, and they came to India empty-handed. Practically, they were not even allowed to take any gold or anything, because on the way there was a lot of plundering and killing just for the sake of possessions, gold and all. So they didn't take anything. They just wanted to come empty-handed. And even in the immigration, there was a lot of checking. So they couldn't bring actually anything. So he was telling, my brother was telling that my grandfather was feeling not very happy seeing that his grandson has to actually work under somebody else. So similarly, it's natural for father or grandfather to feel distress when they see their children or grandchildren distressed, and similarly feel happy when their children or grandchildren are situated well. So although Bhishma Dev is a great Mahajan, but in the family ties, he was related to Pandavas as grandfather. And he had seen Pandavas suffer throughout their lives. Because Pandavas, they lost their father when they were young. They were practically, teenager boys when they lost their father. Maharaj Pandu, he was living in the forest with his two wives one time, and it so happened that he went for hunting. So when he was hunting, he saw a male and female deer engaged in sexual affairs. So he shot arrow at the male deer. He actually killed both of them, the male and female deer. But that was actually a great sage, who had taken the form of deer to have union with his wife. Because in animal kingdom, there is no such regulation for timings, but human beings are supposed to follow timings for doing every activity, especially sexual activity is not allowed for the human beings, especially in the daytime. And also even the nighttime, there are only certain hours which are conducive for where the human beings are allowed to engage in sex according to Vedic customs. And also that's not every day. It's only certain days in the month, when man and woman can actually engage in sex. Because nowadays nobody knows these regulations. So, but sages would follow those regulations very rigidly. But this sage was very powerful, and he wanted to enjoy sex during the daytime with his wives, so that he can't do in the human form. But because he had mystic powers, they took the form of deer. Because animals, they don't have to really worry about, there's no regulation for them. Human beings have regulation, but animals don't have a regulation. So when they were having union in this way, Maharaj Pandu, thinking them to be just ordinary deers, he shot arrow at them. So the sage assumed his form, original form, before dying, and he cursed Maharaj Pandu. The next time when you want to have union with your wife or any woman, then you will immediately die. Until that time, Maharaj Pandu never had any children also. Dhritarashtra, he was blind. He was living in the palace. But Maharaj Pandu, he was, without any children. So he got the curse that if he wants to have union with his wife, he will die. That means he has to die without any children. So sometime when he would, feel inclined to have children with his wife, Madhuri, they would forbid him, no, that you will die, So in this way, he was very distressed. But then, he was reminded that Kunti had been given benediction by Maharaj Durvasumuni. Durvasumuni had given benediction to Kunti Maharani that she could invoke any demigods. So on the instruction of Pandu Maharaj, Kunti Maharani, she invoked, 3 different demigods at 3 different times. And she begot 3 children from them. That happened to be Yudhishthira, Bhima, and Arjun. So she invoked, first Dharmaraj, Yamaraj, and from him she begot Yudhishthira Maharaj. Later on, at another time, she invoked Vayu, and she begot Bhima from him. And later on, with Indra, she begot Arjun. So in this way, she got 3 sons. And she taught the same mantra to Madhuri also, the co-wife, the second wife of Maharaj Pandu. And when she invoked Ashwini Kumaras, she actually got 2 sons from them, Nakul and Sahadev. So, although Maharaj Pandu was restrained, but at one point of time when, after the 5 boys were little grown up, they were probably in the teenagers, one time Maharaj Pandu felt inclined to have union with Madhuri, with his wife, second wife. And although she tried to restrain him, but he couldn't. And then he died, because that was the curse of the sage. So Pandavas, they were deprived of their father. And then, of course, Kunti and Madhvi, they both wanted to enter into this funeral fire of Maharaj Pandu, but because they had 5 children, so one of them had to stay back. So Madhuri insisted to Kunti Maharani that she could take care of children, and she wanted to go with her husband. So she entered into the funeral fire, leaving Nakul and Sahadev under the care of Kunti. So in this way, Kunti Maharani happened to take care of all the 5 children. But it was not an easy task. When she came back to palace, Dhritarashtra's sons, they constantly, along with their maternal uncle, Shakuni, they tried to put the Pandavas through so much injustice and tribulations. There were so many attempts to kill them. So Bhishma had seen, because he was the grandfather, he had seen all the injustice done to Pandavas. And he always wanted all of his grandchildren to be very happy. He wanted Duryodhan to be happy along with his brothers, and he wanted Pandavas also to be happy. But somehow the Duryodhan was not in the favor of living a peaceful life with Pandavas. So Bhishma Dev had seen a lot of injustice being done to Pandavas. So after seeing that now they are situated in such an opulent way without any problem, without any troubles, Bhishma Dev naturally felt very happy. So tears were flowing from his eyes, and he congratulated, the Yudhishthira Maharaj and all the Pandavas. Congratulated them for their victory field and being situated as the rulers of the world, because he knew that Bhishma Dev knew very well that Yudhishthira Maharaj as a Raj Rishi, as saintly king, he would benefit all the subjects. He'll help the people in general to become Krishna conscious and thus perfect their lives. So what does Bhishma Dev speaks? Go to the next verse, text 12. Aho kashtam aho nyayam yad yuyam dharmanandana jivitum nahratam klishtam vipradharma chitashraya. Bhishma Dev said, oh, what terrible sufferings and what terrible injustices you good souls suffer for being the sons of religion personified. You did not deserve to remain alive under those tribulations. Yet you are protected by the Brahmanas, God, and religion. This is one of the very beautiful verses. When Bhishma Dev saw Pandavas, especially Yudhishthira Maharaj, and dressed so opulently, and they were sitting next to him in great affection and love, Bhishma Dev started remembering all the injustices and terrible sufferings they went through. And this is the first word coming out of his mouth. Aho kashtam aho anyaya. Oh, what terrible suffering. Kashta. Anyaya. What terrible injustices you good souls have to go through. Yuyam dharmanandana. You all were actually the sons of dharma, religion person, because the dharmanandana here means, of course, Yudhishthira Maharaj was actually the son of dharma. The dharma is also another name of Yamaraj. He's also called Dharmaraj. So Yudhishthira Maharaj, being the son of dharma, can be referred as Dharmanandana. But it doesn't say Dharmanandana, it says Dharmanandana. All of you are actually sons of dharma. So it means that you all follow dharma or the principles of dharma very rigidly. So in that sense, he's referring them as Dharmanandana. All the 5 Pandavas were highly religious. They always followed, the principles of dharma very, very religiously, very rigidly. So this is the first words coming from the mouth of Bhishma Dev. It's actually very interesting. This is the nature of Vaishnava. Now, of course, Yudhishthira Maharaj and Pandavas went through a lot of injustices and terrible sufferings, but nothing compared to what Bhishmadev went through. Bhishmadev himself is lying on the bed of arrows. He's lying on the bed of arrows. His whole body was pierced with so many arrows. He said there was not a place to put even a needle in between. He had so many arrows in his body. So he had so many arrows in the body. You can imagine how much pain he must be going through, kashta, how much suffering he must be going through, and injustices. If you see the life of Bhishmadev, apparently there was so much injustices done to him. Dhritarashtra, the elder brother of Pandu, he was born blind. So generally in the royal dynasties, it is the custom that the eldest son becomes the king. And the younger brothers of the son, they actually act as the servants. They actually assist the elder brother. But they remain always subservient. Sometimes the elder brother may give them some places to rule, but generally they would always remain with the elder brother as his servants, and not just servants in the sense of paid servant, but they would serve and assist the elder brother in ruling the kingdom, and like and that used to be the royal dynasty principles. Like we see Lord Ramachandra, when he was supposed to become the king, and Bharat, he was expected to become the one of the dear ministers of Maharaj Lord Ramachandra. And later on, Lord Ramachandra, when he actually became the king, he gave the kingdom of Mathura to be ruled by Shatrughan, his youngest brother. Shatrughan actually became the king of Mathura. So in this way, sometimes the elder brother would give some portion to rule to the younger brothers, or sometimes they would just stay with him only, assisting him in ruling the kingdom. So Dhritarashtra was supposed to become the king, and Pandu would have become his minister or his subservient loyal follower, and Pandu was actually very happy in playing that role. But when the decision was supposed to be made that who will become the next king, Vidura, who was actually very expert in the Niti, the Shastras, he pointed out from the scripture the rules that a king cannot be a blind person, because blind person will always be dependent, even just from moving from one place to another place, he has to be dependent on others. So blind person cannot take the role of king. Officially, he cannot become the king. And Bhishmadev, though he knew this rule very well, he still wanted Dhritarashtra to become the king, because he had seen Dhritarashtra had so much eagerness and desperation to become the king. So he wanted Dhritarashtra to become king actually, although he knew the rule. But when Vidura brought it up in the assembly of all the Pandavas and the assembly of all the ministers and everyone, Bhishmadev couldn't do anything. So he allowed Pandu to become the king, and Pandu actually resisted. He said, "No, I will act as the eyes of my brother. I will serve my brother, like his eyes. Let him become the king, and I'll be his servant." But because the ministers and Vidura, they insisted, then Dhritarashtra, taking this, that he could have insisted, but he felt, very much ashamed and embarrassed that Pandu was so, eager to serve him. So he himself stepped out. No, I will not become the king. Let Pandu become the king. Though at the heart he developed, kind of little, animosity, but but still, because he was a great soul, he was not an ordinary person. He actually agreed that yes, actually I'm misfit. I cannot be a king. So he stepped down, and Pandu became the king. So Dhritarashtra, though he was being maintained very royally, like an elder brother and respected person by Pandu, he had this ambition to occupy the throne as the king. And later on, when Kunti, the wife of Maharaj Pandu, she gave birth to Maharaj Yudhishthir before Gandhari. Gandhari was pregnant and Kunti was also pregnant. So when the news came that Kunti has given birth to the child first, Gandhari, who was so much anticipating that her son will be born first and thus he'll become the king, because she had seen her husband's ambition. So she thought, my husband couldn't become the king, at least my son will become the king. So she was very much anticipating that her son will be born first. But when she heard the news, when she was still pregnant, she heard the news that Kunti had delivered the male child. Yudhishthira Maharaj was born. So she became so upset, thinking that, oh, my son also cannot be. So she hit her stomach, she was pregnant, so she hit the stomach with the stone and thus aborted the child. The child fell out of her womb dead. And she hit so hard that it fell into pieces. The child came out in the pieces. There were 100 pieces of that child. She hit so hard to her belly. So Vyasdev, taking pity on Gandhari, he actually kept all those 100 pieces of flesh and in the earthen pot, and with the mantras, he actually revived them. So Gandhari actually ended up in having 100 sons. They all became the living children by the yogic powers of Vyasdev. So in this way, she ended up having 100 children. But when these sons grew up, especially the eldest of them, when he was actually maturely born, that was the most inauspicious moment. And whether when he saw the calculations of the birth chart of all the children, of the 100 children, he actually told Dhritarashtra that this eldest of your son, he's very evil. According to his birth chart, I can see he's going to be a very evil person. He'll be the cause of destroying your entire dynasty. So please abandon him. Keep other 99, but just abandon this one child. Leave him in the forest anyway. Let anyone else take care of him. In this way, he'll be, not inheriting any throne. He'll be the damage will be minimized. He didn't tell him to kill the child, but he told him this: abandon this child. Don't let him be the prince. Don't let him be the royal prince in your family. He will cause the destruction of your entire dynasty. But Dhritarashtra, he could not, because of his attachment. He couldn't. So that happened to be Duryodhana. And there were so many plots, So Dhritarashtra always had this eagerness that I want to become the king. But when the Pandu died, later on, Dhritarashtra was made the caretaker of the kingdom as the king temporarily till the time Yudhishthira Maharaj grew up. So he became the king. And when he became the king, he felt that the destiny had done a lot of injustice to him by removing him from the royal throne, but now he has got the throne. So he was not willing to leave that position. Even when Yudhishthira Maharaj grew up, he was so eager to hand over his kingdom to his own son, Duryodhana. Although Duryodhana was not only younger, but he was also disqualified because of his inimical nature, because of his evil nature. He was not qualified even as a king. He was not liked by the subjects so much as Pandavas were being liked by the subjects. And of course, even the family tradition-wise, he was the younger to Yudhishthira Maharaj. So he had no, right to claim as a royal throne, as a king. So Dhritarashtra always thought himself that he had been so much injustice was done to him because he couldn't become the king. On the other hand, we see Bhishma Dev, he was the eldest son of Maharaj Shantanu. And Maharaj Shantanu, one time he went, for hunting, and he was on the bank of a river. So he was crossing the river in a boat. And the lady who was actually navigating the boat, she was a very beautiful lady. Her body was very fragrant. In fact, the body's fragrance would go about, about 1 yojana, 8 miles around. Her fragrance could be actually, people could smell the beautiful fragrance coming from her body. And she was so beautiful. So Maharaj Shantanu wanted to marry her because Mother Ganga, the mother of Bhishma Dev, she had already left for the heavenly planets. So Maharaj Shantanu was living with his son. He didn't have wife. So he got attracted to this lady. But when he went to the father of the lady, who happened to be a fisherman, her name was Padmavati, and her father happened to be a fisherman. So he asked her that, I want to marry your daughter, and he refused. He said, no, I cannot marry my daughter to you because, the children which will be born of her, they will have no, claim in the royal inheritance, because your eldest son, who is actually Bhishma, who is actually that time known as Devrat will become the king. So if you promise that my daughter's children will become the king, then I can marry her. And Maharaj Shantanu, he was the Rajrishi. He said, no, I cannot do this. No, I don't care to, even if I don't get your daughter in marriage, that's perfectly fine, but I cannot do injustice to my son. My son is actually a very well qualified person. He is fit to be a king. The subjects love him so much. And he is a proper heir of my throne. So he left. And the fisherman also didn't care. He said, no, if you cannot promise, then I cannot marry my daughter to you. So Maharaj Shantanu went, but he was, very morose at palace, because his heart was attracted to this lady, this beautiful woman. So Bhishma Dev, he could see that his father was not so happy. So he asked the chariot driver that my father had gone with you. So tell me the reason. You might know reason. So the chariot driver actually told. It's very interesting. Bhishma Dev didn't ask his father. He could have asked his father, but he knew that his father, if something related to him, he will not tell him. So he just inquired from the chariot driver, and hearing from the chariot driver, he actually went to the fisherman. So fisherman said, well, this is the proposal I put to your father, that my daughter's son should become the king. So he refused. So I cannot marry my daughter to him. So Bhishma says, they said, all right, I give up my claim to royal inheritance. I promise you, your daughter's son, my younger brothers, he will become the king. But this fisherman, typically acting like a materialistic person, he said, well, you may give up the inheritance, but you are the eldest son. So naturally, you will have the sons before my daughter's sons. So they will become the king. Because they will be the eldest in the family. So they will become the king. So my daughter's son may become the king, but her grandson will not become the king. Just see, this is a typical calculation of materialistic people. He is going to die. He's the old man. He's going to die soon. But he's worried about not only the daughter, but the daughter's children and her grandchildren also. This is how people actually so foolish in this world. They try to accumulate so much wealth for their children, for grandchildren, great-grandchildren. They go to hell, by manipulating and doing so much, sinful activities to accumulate money. Now, this fisherman also, acted like an ordinary materialistic person. So Bhishma, they said, all right. He took an oath. There, then and there, he told the I take oath, I will never get married. I will remain as a Naishtika brahmachari. I will never beget a child. So nobody can claim inheritance from my side. And when the fisherman heard this, wow, he became so stunned. And the demigods, when they heard this promise of Bhishma, they shouted out, Bhishma, Bhishma, Bhishma. Bhishma means very great, very, terrible vow. He has taken such a terrible vow. So therefore his name became actually Bhishma from that point onwards. So then he told the fisherman, now you are happy? He said, yes, I'm happy. So fisherman gave his daughter, and Bhishma Dev, taking Padmavati, he came to his palace and handed over Padmavati to his father and narrated the whole thing. And Maharaj Shantanu was so stunned. He said, my dear son, why did you do this? But he knew that Bhishma had already taken vow, now he will never get married. So he married Padmavati, and had 2 sons from her. So in this way, Bhishma Dev was, in one way removed from the royal inheritance. So Padmavati had 2 sons, Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. So Chitrangada, he was the elder son of Padmavati. He went to the forest and he got in an argument with some Gandharva, whose name was also Chitrangada, and that Gandharva actually killed him. So Vichitravirya, the second son of Padmavati, he became the king. But he died also prematurely because he didn't have good health. So he also died prematurely because of tuberculosis. And he had 2 wives, Ambika and Ambalika. Say these both ladies, they were without any children. So Bhishma Dev still did not get married. His 2 brothers died without having any children. Bhishma Dev still did not claim the throne. That time Padmavati actually told, my dear son, you should get married and you should inherit this throne because my children are not, they didn't have the destiny to be the rulers. You should inherit. And he refused. He said, no, mother. That he made Vyasdev, with the permission of Mother Padmavati, Vyasdev and begot the children and the 2 queens of Vichitravirya and also one of the maidservants of Vichitravirya. The 3 sons were born as Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura. So in this way, Dhritarashtra, because of being born blind, he was removed from the inheritance and Pandu became the king. But Dhritarashtra used to think, so much injustice is done to me. But just imagine how much injustice was done to, in one way, Bhishma Dev. Of course, Bhishma Dev never considered it as an injustice because Vaishnavas never think that there have been injustice with them. Yudhishthira Maharaj was never thinking that there has been injustice with him. Bhishma Dev never thought that there was injustice with him, with himself. But as soon as he sees Pandavas, he thinks, aho kashtam, aho anyaya. How much injustices you Pandavas, you good souls, have gone through. Now, just imagine, Bhishma Dev was laying in the bed of arrows, and who had put him in the bed of arrows? It was Arjuna. Each and every arrow within the body of Bhishma was shot by Arjuna and no one else. So Bhishma could have told Arjuna, as soon as he saw Arjuna, he could have told him, oh rascal, just see what you have done to me. You have given me so much pain. No, Bhishma Dev is not even considering any of that. He's thinking how much injustice and how much suffering Arjuna, Bhim, Nakul, Sahadev, and headed by Yudhishthira Maharaj, they have to go through so much injustice and suffering. He is not considering his own suffering and injustice that he has to go through. And further he says Jivitum nartha klishtam vipra dharma chutashraya. In those tribulations, in those kashta and anyayas, you would have died. Any ordinary person would have died in such situation. Jivitum na artha. Na arhata means to deserve. And na arhata means, nobody would have survived such tribulations. So you would not have survived those tribulations. But, Vipra Dharma Achyuta Ashraya, because you were in the ashraya, in the shelter of Vipra, the Brahman, Dharma, the religion or religious principles, and Achyuta, the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna. He's also called Achyuta. So because you had the shelter of the Brahmanas, the Dharma, and the Supreme Lord. All three are actually, in a hierarchy way, you can say Brahmanas, they are very powerful. They are, they have the ability to curse or benedict ordinary people. So Pandavas were always very respectful to Brahmanas. They would always be seeking blessings from the Brahmanas. And they never deviated from principles of Dharma. They were always following the principle of Dharma. And of course, they had so much devotion to the Lord that Lord is on their side. So in spite of having Lord on their side, in spite of following the principle of Dharma so rigidly, and in spite of having protection from the Brahmanas, they still have to go through so much kashta, so much suffering, and so much injustices, so much anyaya, that they would have died in those circumstances. But they were protected by Krishna, the Dharma, and the Brahmanas. So this is the Dhamma sense of this. We will continue next week from text 13 onwards. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.